All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an internet educational channel, and we try to take a look at great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, holistic worldviews, and so on that can help you with your own human evolution and individual, you know, development. And today is our 526th video that we've done on the reciprocal system of theory from Dewey B. Larson. And Mr. Larson was an American engineer who lived in the 20th century. He died back in 1990. And before he did, he published a number of books and articles, put together a little bit of an organization, had some associates that have also put out some stuff. And Larson was one of the few scientists who proposed a universe of motion. The universe is not made out of matter. It's not made out of energy, but it is made out of motion. And in particular, it's what Larson calls scalar motion. It is a motion that has a magnitude, but it has no specific direction, which you can envision using a balloon that you put dots on. If you blow up the balloon, all the dots will be moving away from each other, but in no specific direction. All of the dots will be moving away from all of the other dots, or each dot will be moving away from each other dot, meaning that every dot is moving in every direction. And if you contract the balloon, all the dots will be moving toward each other. These are Larson's two most fundamental motions, which he calls the progression and gravitation. And then the other kind of key part of Larson's system is that motion is the relationship between space and time. So all of our scientific entities, not just speed, not just acceleration, but also matter and energy and force and pressure and electric charge and electric current and magnetic flux and, electrical capacitance and power and momentum. These are all forms of motion, and they all can be expressed specifically and exclusively in terms of space and time, with space or time as the numerator and time or space as the denominator, with the caveat that time or space can be in multiple dimensions. Time and space can be in multiple dimensions. So, for example, matter in Larson's system is time to the third power over space to the third power. Energy in Larson's system is time over space. And this also serves as a great check for your, all your classical equations and, any equations that you come up with. So Larson, in 1959, published his two fundamental postulates. The first postulate is where he articulates his original findings, where he says that the universe is composed entirely of one component, motion, existing in 3 dimensions, in discrete units, and with 2 reciprocal aspects, space and time. Okay, now then he took his fundamental postulate, that first one, and he plugs it into the second fundamental postulate, which is that the universe conforms to the relations of ordinary commutative mathematics. Its primary magnitudes are absolute, and its geometry is Euclidean. And from that, he derives a theoretical universe, what his universe would look like if his postulates are correct. And then he, in many of his books, he compares his theoretical universe with the so-called actual universe of modern science. And we've looked at some of those books in the past. We've gone through a number of Larson's works here in these 525 videos so far, including his outline of the deductive development of the reciprocal system, which shows how he was able to derive his theoretical universe from his initial postulates. Also, the book Beyond Space and Time, which was his final book, that is on metaphysics, philosophy, religion, psychology, biology, all are covered in that book. And we looked at his book Nothing But Motion, which is primarily on atomic physics. And we also looked at his book Basic Properties of Matter, which is his book on chemistry. So we've looked at a number of his, Larson being able to apply his theory to a number of different subjects. Now we've started to look at one of Larson's books on economics. This book is called The Road to Permanent Prosperity. And he also has a book that's called The Road to Full Employment. And we'll probably touch on that as well as we go through this. Now, I don't know that I'm going to be reading this book in its entirety, but at least the first 6 or 8 chapters to get a sense of what Larson's doing. And again, we're not necessarily going through this process in order to, figure out every little detail that Larson, posits in his books about economics or chemistry or physics. We're trying to see how Larson derives these things, how he goes about plugging in his system to various subjects. And you need to be able to kind of see a broad spectrum of different subjects that he applies it to, so that you can kind of figure out how to apply the system to whatever subject you want to apply it to. It is a theory of everything, a generalized theory. So if you can become fluent with the theory, then you can use it like a magic wand, and you can apply it to anything that you want to apply it to. So that's kind of the key. I mean, I think it's a great, side effect that you will be able to maybe learn some economics, or your road to permanent prosperity, or you learn, how chemistry works, or physics, or anything. But also that you are able to wield Larson's system, because that's what it's for. It's not, he's showing you how to plug it in to various subjects, but he wants you to plug it in yourself. He wants to teach people how to use it, but it's a difficult study, and so you need to be able to see it applied in many different ways, because there are a lot of kind of lacuna and exceptions and specific circumstances, and you have to really be able to navigate, different situations. For example, the time region or the space region, and equivalent space, and the interregional ratio. These are all things that come into play that when you encounter them once, they seem as if, oh, where's Larson getting this from? This is just a fudge factor. He's just plugging this in order to get a result, But then you see him using the same thing in a completely different subject, but in the same context. And so you see that he's applying these things very consistently, but you can't see that until you have studied a number of his different works. Also on this channel, we've looked at some of his associates, in particular Dr. Bruce Perrett, a little bit from Dr. KVK Nehru, two of the people who have spearheaded the RS2, which is kind of the reevaluation of the reciprocal system, correcting some of Larson's mistakes since his death in 1990. And as Larson admitted that he was subject to making mistakes, he believed that the theory itself was correct. Whether he applied it correctly was a different question. And so they have done some great work as well, which we've tried to cover and we will continue to try to cover as we move along here. Okay, so now we're in chapter 3 of the Road to Permanent Prosperity, and this chapter is called Economic Objectives. And the point that Larson's making here, now, it's interesting to see how Larson applies his reciprocal system to something like economics. Space and time, reciprocity, discrete units, speed, 3 dimensions. What does that all have to do with economics? Well, in the second chapter, which is, I guess, the first chapter, because the first chapter is just an introduction. But in the second chapter, he talks about how we need to use a scientific approach here. Economics has kind of degraded into this social science, this sociological approach where we plug these things in kind of based on our political affiliation. Are we a capitalist, and do we want to stimulate the economy and make more money, or are we an egalitarian? Are we in search of benefiting the poor, bringing the poor up to the same standard that the other classes enjoy, or whatever and so he's saying that the economists too often fall into the camps of falling into political ideas. And he's saying ultimately the major economic law is work or starve. You either work or you starve. And doesn't matter how much you want to help the poor or how much you are interested in free market capitalism. If you don't abide by that law, your economic system is going to fail. He compares it to the building of a bridge or something like that, where doesn't matter what you want the bridge to look like or where you want to put it. If it doesn't comply with the basic laws of architecture, and physics, it's going to collapse. You've got to construct your system based on facts, on facts, and then you might be able to deal with the social objectives later on, but you've got to have a factual basis for what you're doing. Okay, so we're going to take over here in the middle of this chapter and hopefully finish the chapter, and then we'll start up the next one next time. Okay. Sooner or later, the nation and the world at large will have to accept the fact that attainment of any social objective, other than those automatically accomplished by processes such as technological progress, that work in harmony with the economic mechanism, involves a cost, and provision should be made for meeting that cost from public funds. Otherwise, the attempt to reach the objective will fail, unless it is possible to shift the cost burden to the public through the price mechanism. As will be brought out in the subsequent discussion, attempts to impose the cost on the producers, the employers, are futile. I think he's particularly talking about like minimum wage and or wage reform for workers and real wages, where he's talking about economic reformers who are trying to, raise the minimum wage, and he's saying, well, ultimately, if you pass this minimum wage requirement onto employers who are then forced to pay substandard workers a certain amount for which is more than they're worth, by the market, then they're just going to pass that on to the consumers, and so you're going to end up with inflation or whatever. So I think that's the context that he's talking about this here. So otherwise, the attempt to reach the objective will fail unless it is possible to shift the cost burden to the public through the price mechanism. As will be brought out in the subsequent discussion, attempts to impose the cost on the producers or the employers are futile. The hope that it will be lost in the intricacies of some ingenious scheme for creating synthetic purchasing power out of nothing is likewise doomed to expire in the light of cold reality. And that's another thing that Larson rails against, is these something for nothing schemes. That's another theme that he harps on here throughout this book. The separation of the factual aspects of economics from the sociological aspects that we are here proposing should also go a long way toward clarifying the present ambiguous position of the economists. The professional workers in the field of economics feel that they should rightfully be accorded the same kind of an authoritative status that the scientists enjoy in their field. But all too often, the economists' recommendations meet the kind of reception indicated by the quotation from Franklin Roosevelt in Chapter 2. Economists, says Max Black, are sometimes treated like witches in otherwise civilized communities. What is being overlooked here is that the scientist and the engineer maintain their authoritative standing only because they confine themselves to factual matters and do not try to make the decisions. The role of the engineer is well understood, both by himself and by the community, and his recommendations are seldom overruled for physical reasons, although they are frequently overruled for other reasons. An engineering recommendation for a cantilever bridge, based on lower cost and equal or better serviceability under the existing circumstances, may well be rejected by a community that prefers a suspension bridge on aesthetic grounds. But this does not imply any doubt as to the soundness of the engineering recommendations. It simply means that other considerations outweigh the engineering aspects in the minds of the citizens who make the ultimate choice. The world is no more willing to let the economists make the decisions in economic matters than it is to let the engineers make the decisions in physical matters. Where the public rules, such decisions are made by the general public. Where others rule, they are made by the rulers, whoever they may be. In any event, they are not made by the engineers or the economists, except to the extent that those individuals are also members of the general public or the ruling group. The difference is that the engineer recognizes the logic of this situation and accepts it as a matter of course. The economist usually, or at least frequently, does not. The sense of frustration which the economists so often mention and more often reveal by the way in which they express their views on matters of public policy has its origin in their conception as to the functions of their profession, a conception that is not accepted by the community at large. Of course, the economist suffers from the fact that he is so frequently wrong, and in some instances, as in the predictions of economic conditions that would follow the conclusion of World War II, spectacularly wrong. And he is further handicapped by the inability of the members of his profession to agree among themselves. But the primary reason why the recommendations of the economists are not given the same weight and the same respectful consideration as those of the engineer is that the economists' recommendations are not based solely, perhaps not even primarily, on economic principles. They are dictated to a large and often controlling degree by non-economic, mainly social preferences and prejudices. The average citizen knows, even though he may not stop to analyze the situation very closely, that the advice which he gets from the economists on a subject such as a price control measure, for example, is not like the recommendations of the engineer designed to aid the public in getting the results which they want. It is designed to accomplish what the economist believes should be done. The mere fact that the economists can be, and commonly are, categorized by such terms as liberal or conservative is a clear indication of the difference. We do not have liberal engineers. As brought out in the foregoing discussion, the ostensibly economic objectives that present-day economists identify as their principal concerns are actually social, or no more than socio-economic at most. No general agreement has ever been reached as to what these purely social objectives ought to be, particularly with respect to the degree to which ethical considerations should enter into their conclusions. Quote, opinions range, or have ranged, says J.M. Clark, from the view that economics has nothing to do with ethics, to the view that it must formulate explicitly ethical standards that furnish its setting and give its analysis meaning. End quote. From one school of economic thought, we get the dictum, quote, economics as a science is neutral. It can express neither approval nor disapproval, end quote. While at the same time, another tells us just as definitively or definitely, quote, hardly any economic theory can be considered ideologically neutral. We can, therefore, define the objectives of economic science. They are to determine the principles and relations governing economic processes and to apply this information to devising the most efficient means of attaining the economic objectives designated by the appropriate agencies of organized society. What we are undertaking in this work is to apply the time-tested methods of physical sciences, not the methods which the economists have been calling scientific, the methods of the social sciences, but the methods which scientists actually use and which they call scientific, to the factual aspects of economics to see whether we can duplicate some of the highly satisfactory results that have been thus obtained in the physical fields. Subdividing according to the scientific pattern, we can say that the objective of pure economic science is to determine the nature and characteristics of the relations that exist between the various economic entities and processes. And the objective of applied economic science is to determine how the information developed by the scientific investigators can best be applied to accomplish whatever ends the individual, group, or society as a whole may choose to seek. Okay, that's the end of chapter 3 there on the scientific approach. And chapter 4 here is called value. And I believe we will start that up next time. Now, I just wanted to add that if you want to get a more thorough accounting of Dewey B. Larson and his reciprocal system, the two fundamental postulates and what their ramifications are and how they fit into the whole system, and kind of the general dynamics of the system, the rudiments of the system. You want to just watch one of my first 474 videos on the subject. I think excluding maybe 221 to 224. So, just watch, say, any of my first, couple hundred. We'll say anyone in the 300s, say, watch one of the videos in the 300s. And I should be going into a fairly detailed discussion of how the reciprocal system works, and then a short, explication of how it's applied, depending on where we are in what book we're working on or what article we're working on. So, that's just if you're curious. Hopefully with this book on economics, you can probably follow along without too much of the background information. And so thanks for tuning in today, and we'll be coming back to look at chapter 4 tomorrow. Otherwise, have a great day.